She-Hulk. Jennifer Walters might be one of the most dependable team members that Marvel Comics have reliably pulled off the bench for more than 40 years, ever since her first appearance in The Savage She-Hulk #1. She-Hulk's first run as the front and center lead lasted 25 issues, surprisingly, and since then has popped up to join the Avengers, to fight alongside the Fantastic Four, S.H.I.E.L.D., Hulk. She even had another 60-issue run leading the sensational She-Hulk. You could say, in a comic book sense, that Jennifer Walters, and pardon my pun here, has a lot of issues. Yet still not as many issues as her terrible Disney Plus show has. God damn it. Ugh. And look, I really like She-Hulk. I think that when employed correctly, she's actually one of the more fascinating and relatable characters in the comics. I mean, look, I'm not like a She-Hulk expert or anything like that, but I've really enjoyed what she brings to the table, especially in a team dynamic, and I'm still looking forward to see her team up with the Avengers in whenever that happens. I guess in the Kang dynamic. You know what? It doesn't matter. But look, guys, She-Hulk Attorney at Law is here, and it's not good. Full disclosure, I've gotten to see about half of the episode, spoiler alert, for the first 4 or 5, and if I'm being honest, there's really not much to spoil. It's just a law comedy procedural. There's not even, like, Daredevil doesn't even show up. There you go. There's your disclaimer. I don't even get to see the Daredevil episode, so there's really nothing to give away here. Well, I'm not going to write the show off entirely. I mean, look, it is half a show. I can't really say that this is a complete failure or whatever, but I have a pretty good sense of what this series is, and I can't say that I'm itching to finish the remaining 4 or 5 episodes. You know, I guess I could have seen it coming. It wouldn't be the first time I got burned by one of these MCU shows, and it probably won't be the last either. They're honestly starting to all blend together, suffering from similar issues. But the fact of the matter is, with She-Hulk, there could have been a good show here. There are some interesting ideas, and Tatiana Maslany is doing sincerely great work stepping into the role of Jennifer Walters. She is carrying this whole thing on her back, but she's so often sidelined by the show's desperate need to show off one of the worst looking CGI characters in recent memory. Like, good God, it's like Fiona from Shrek. When Jennifer is in her She-Hulk form, the CGI just looks bad. And it's not even bad relative to 2022. It looks bad relative to Hulk dogs. And even beyond the uncanny valley nightmare that is She-Hulk on a visual level, the death knell of this show is the absolute overdose of cringe humor, an endless barrage of gags that are so moronic, so unoriginal and unfunny that it makes most network sitcoms look clever and witty. Being a sitcom, you would expect She-Hulk to at least deliver the laughs, but for me, and let me just point this out, this is just me, some of you might find this funny, and that's great, but for me, it simply doesn't. It's clearly, as many have pointed out, going for the Ally McBeal type woman in the workplace legal comedy, but it's also not saying anything more than broad strokes, nothing particularly compelling that wasn't already addressed in that 1997 series. Now that could have been an interesting thread to follow, right? Digging into how people think 20-some years of progress should equate to a more equal and diverse workplace, but it's really just the same shit with a new coat of paint. But She-Hulk isn't savvy enough to even pursue that idea. It might be compelling for some. I mean, I'm clearly not a woman, so it might actually work for a lot of female viewers, and that's great. I'm really happy if it is resonating for a lot of viewers. I'm just one asshole with an opinion, but when the dialogue is so bad that it's bashing you over the head with girl boss slogans from a gift shop rather than addressing these issues in a nuanced and sensitive way, a real way, I get nothing from that. If you're gonna use a sledgehammer, which is something that I actually advocate for a lot on this channel, as I think it's quite effective when employed properly, actually say something as opposed to making broad observations. It also doesn't help that the show's genre smash of serialized legal comedy and syndicated superhero origin story isn't necessarily blending as well as it should. There's some genuinely compelling work being done with Jen having superpowers, a life, and attention she didn't want thrust upon her, and having to discover a new normal while simultaneously caught up in the fallout, good, bad, gross, and everything in between, of celebrity. But ironically, the show can't quite strike a balance between the two formats, so both aspects feel shortchanged and Frankenstein together. Look, for the first time, one of these MCU shows actually feels like a proper TV show instead of a 6-hour film, so I guess that's a step in the right direction, but a TV show being a TV show is the absolute barest of bare essentials you need when making a TV show. Giving props for finally getting the format simply isn't enough. There are plenty of bad network sitcoms, which, again, this definitely feels reminiscent of, that get the format but absolutely botch the execution. It's just called bad television. She-Hulk, despite some bright spots, and genuinely there are some great moments across the episodes that I've watched, is kind of that. Man, all this TV talk is making me think of TV dinners, making me hungry. Yes. Luckily, every plate is here to Hulk smash the idea out of my head and give me some real food. As summer winds down and your schedule gets busy, set yourself up for success with the ultimate time and money-saving hack, meal kits from Every Plate. At first, I thought meal kits had to be expensive, and a lot of the times they are, trust me, but it turns out Every Plate is 25% cheaper than grocery shopping, which is mind-blowing to think about. Every Plate offers options for everybody. Choose any option from their menu, including classic plate, veggie plate, family plate, and easy plate, so you can try whatever you want without committing to one preference. With recipes like caramelized onion burger and sweet Thai chili chicken, it's never been easy to discover what eating well looks like for you. Every Plate hooked me up with some really cool recipes, and I've been using them for a couple of weeks now, and honestly, I've been able to experience more of my favorite things in life by saving time. Again, you all know, frantic weeknights, I'm going to screenings, I'm recording videos, I'm trying to stay up until midnight not losing my mind about the goddamn Green Giant. So try it out for yourself. Get your first box for just $1.49 per meal by going to everyplate.com and entering code FilmSpeak149. That's $1.49 per meal at everyplate.com with the code FilmSpeak149. That's up to $110 value. Seriously, guys, this is a great deal, and thank you so much to Every Plate for sponsoring this video. Out of all the episodes I screened, episode 1 of She-Hulk was by far the best of the bunch, and since most of you have seen that episode by now, you know how low of a bar that is, and believe me when I say it really only gets worse from there. Episode 1 is essentially the origin story, or at least the inciting incident of the origin of She-Hulk, and man, it doesn't get much more lame than Jen and Bruce going on a car ride only to suddenly be attacked by a random Sakaar ship that causes the most contrived scenario where Bruce is bleeding and somehow bleeds into one of Jen's cuts, turning her into the She-Hulk. While the distorted reflection of Jen turning into She-Hulk is a nice nod to the original Lou Ferrigno Hulk series, the idea that Bruce just miraculously developed a device that makes him human only for it to serve as the reason he bleeds onto Jen is one of the laziest plot devices in one of these shows I've seen thus far. On one hand, I respect being concise with origin stories because we've seen so many of them, but on the other, at least act like you care enough about the new character you're introducing into the MCU to give them a proper starting point. That laziness, the feeling of I can't be bothered to do more, while mostly harmless here, is an attitude I take serious issue with as we go into the later episodes, specifically the courtroom drama, but more on that later. Stupidity of how the show establishes its premise aside, whatever. The MCU has a She-Hulk now, and honestly the idea of a story that the first episode teases is actually kind of interesting. Here you have Bruce, who has been struggling with his powers his whole life, who went on a multi-year journey to mastering how to control the beast within. It was painful, it was the most difficult process he could have gone through, but he went on that journey and now has the resources to make it easier for Jen. The biggest problem with this, something that truthfully stems beyond She-Hulk and is an unfortunate casualty of the Hulk being owned by Universal, is it's all told to us. We're constantly reminded of the struggle of Bruce's journey, how difficult it is for him living with a monster inside who could grab hold of the wheel at any moment and who has caused society to ostracize him out of fear. The Incredible Hulk, the Avengers, and Avengers Age of Ultron do a pretty solid job of laying down that foundation. But since then, Banner and the Hulk have been slowly reduced to the comedic side character, thanks in large part to f***ing Taika Waititi and Thor Ragnarok. Anyways, with little, if any, on-screen growth. It's like they took the mild backlash to the Natasha Banner thread from Age of Ultron and treated it as a death sentence for both characters, but especially Banner and the Hulk. Similar to most bad MCU decisions, the studio takes away the wrong message from the criticism received and pivots away from risk-taking. They figured out the wrong way to retool the character, to elicit a laugh out of the audience instead of caring about Hulk as the tormented hero with a decade's worth of baggage and trauma to unpack. It's made even worse following the time jump from Infinity War to Endgame, where suddenly Banner just figured his shit out, merged the brain and the brawn of both he and the Hulk together to create Professor Hulk. God, that is, I really dislike this version of the character. It just feels like a lazy way to circumvent writing a character's journey from point A to point B because, again, you can't be bothered. She-Hulk had the perfect opportunity to delve deeper into that transformation, to explore how Bruce sorted his shit out and how that in turn can help Jen. Unfortunately, She-Hulk just repeats what we already know with nothing new to say, a common thread in multiple areas of this show. I guess you could say that the She-Hulk series is like the ultimate hype woman. It's not like they don't try either, which is what makes a lot of this frustrating. Instead of exploring how Bruce thinks he's overcome his trauma, it's more interested in critiquing the idea that he has and psychoanalyzing what's really going on with him from an outside perspective. I'm actually intrigued by the idea of Bruce projecting his anxieties about the Hulk, public perception, lack of acceptance, tiptoeing around a minefield of fear, judgment, death, and destruction onto Jen, and how she's staring back at him, dismissing his attempts to control her journey just because his own was complicated and rough.
You can't be emotional. Forget Hulk rage. Just regular anger means death and destruction for everything and everyone around you. And I'm telling you, when people start seeing you as a monster that never goes away.
To me, that's Bruce outwardly expressing his guilt about the collateral damage that has come from his actions as the Hulk, of the view many still have of him. Remember in Civil War when Ross showed the Avengers that cell phone video of Hulk smashing across a building, the rubble from which almost definitely killed the person holding the phone? That's what Bruce lives with, and what he'll always live with, the monster within. That's what he's convinced awaits Jen if he doesn't take hold of her training. I also think him being very hands-on and I know best about Hulk with Jen is his way of making himself feel better. It's the one thing he spent his life tormented by, and so you can kind of understand why he might feel a bit happy to show someone the ropes, to show someone what it means to be a Hulk, even if the journey is difficult. The problem is, it comes at the cost of trying to control Jen's life, of trying to make her choices for her. Bruce sees Jen as his second chance to get this whole Hulk thing right, instead of asking Jen what she wants or how she feels about the whole situation. Now, Jen's definitely a bit headstrong. She thinks that because her relationship with the Hulk within is more evolved, that she's got it all figured out. Obviously, that's not the case, but like any mentor, Bruce has to learn to take both of his hands off of Jen's wheel, the very thing the Hulk did to him, and let her figure herself out on her own, make some of her own mistakes. If you really think about it, Bruce has been a victim of a controlling relationship with the Hulk for so long, been submissive for so long that he's starved for any aspect of life he can have control over. It just so happens that thing is a person. That person is his cousin, Jennifer Walters. And that person will not let a man, or really anyone, dictate how she lives her life. It's honestly a really interesting dichotomy that I really wish was given more time to develop, because it's a case where you can understand where both characters are coming from, even if Bruce is very clearly in the wrong with the extent to which he takes things. He can impart wisdom and his own life experiences, but those experiences aren't an absolute. The reality is, they're two different people living two very different lives. Bruce is so self-serious here, and Jen has the wit to kind of poke fun at his sciencey jargon with her lawyer intuition that there's something more going on underneath. I think this is actually the first time since The Incredible Hulk, really, that we really get to see Bruce's intellectual arrogance and fears brought out a bit. It kind of plays back into how Edward Norton viewed him as Prometheus. I mean, it's definitely not that deep or effective, largely because, again, I've already spent more time on all of this than the show does, but it's nice to see a Bruce more overly confident in his brain than unconfident and uncertain of whether or not he's thinking about things the right way. It gets shoved aside way too quickly for the training montage, because what else are you gonna do as a Hulk? Another example of Bruce really only having experience doing one thing and using his brain and brawn for one thing, being a hero, saving lives physically. And speaking of that training montage, look, could I spend 20 minutes going on about how bad the CGI She-Hulk is, and have I already gone on that tangent? Yes, and how they realistically could have done this all practically? I digress. It doesn't break the show, but it sure doesn't help much. It's just crazy to me to think that this and this are even parts of the same franchise, never mind shown on screen together. Your mileage may vary, I guess, but to me, this is really some of the worst big budget CGI that we've gotten in years. Anyway, after a mildly entertaining Hulk on Hulk fight scene, the boiling point of Bruce's overly controlling mentorship, and side note, it's really nice to see some action in the pilot for one of these shows, something that actually brings excitement and it's action that deals with the character's emotional state. It's great. I'm glad that they included that in here. Anyway, before a mildly entertaining Hulk on Hulk fight scene, we're treated to arguably the best scene in the entire episode. See, Jen has no ambitions of being a superhero. It doesn't matter that she has these powers. It doesn't matter that Bruce is steadfast in insisting that we can live between what we want and what is, but we can't pretend like we aren't two of the only people on Earth that can protect her. Jen is entitled to live the life she desires. Bruce is a very tragic individual with different life experiences from Jen. He can give tips, but ultimately her journey towards having Hulk powers is its own beast, completely new territory, and she can't follow anyone's path but her own. The idea of being a superhero is not appealing to Jen. She doesn't want to join some government contractor squad, which is essentially what the Avengers are, and have her entire life taken from her. In her mind, Bruce is a cautionary tale. He never dealt with his trauma, he's severely isolated, he has no real relationships in his life. Bruce justifies it as the price for keeping the world a better place. Jen feels that she can help people in her own way, as a lawyer, as a defense attorney, and that she doesn't have to follow the same path as Bruce. And ultimately, Bruce is really just trying to get her to stay to fix his own problems, not to guide her. Bruce sees Jen as a companion, someone he can have around to keep him company, someone to help him feel a little less lonely. But she's not a thing that Bruce can use to fill all of his regrets, wants, and desires in. It's an interesting and understandable direction to take Bruce Banner in, someone who's largely been isolated, subconsciously suffering from unaddressed trauma. It's a valid direction to take the character. I just don't like the execution. I don't know if I entirely buy Bruce, especially as Professor Hulk, as an almost creepy, insecure captor with a good guy complex, which is essentially how the episode paints him. It ties into the larger commentary on toxic masculinity and the everyday struggles of women just trying to exist, to which we get a solid monologue from Maslany explaining what she's had to go through being a woman and a woman in a male-dominated workplace, and how that's, for better or worse, allowed her to come to terms with her emotions, inherently have more control over her anger than Bruce due to the ways society treats women and expects them to remain composed at all times. I really appreciate the sentiment, but this monologue feels a bit off, like they picked the wrong target here, especially since we as an audience know all of the horrible things that Bruce has had to go through just to get back to a place of balance, all the friends he's lost along the way. Now, I'm not by any means trying to justify Bruce's actions here, especially him trying to control and talk down to Jen, but I understand why he's doing that, and so it just feels weird for Jen to attack Bruce in this regard, although sometimes maybe just being blunt like that is what's needed in order to get through to someone. I don't know. And I've seen a lot of talk about how, oh, this might be the first time men hear a woman speak candidly about horrifying experience like this. And I don't really like that or necessarily agree with that assertion, not because it isn't potentially true, not because it isn't powerful. It is, and if this is actually true, I'm glad, because these are experiences that young men definitely need to hear, but because it implies She-Hulk is blazing some new trail for inclusion when it's just walking down a well-trodden path. This isn't even the first Marvel project to make this exact point, not even counting Jessica Jones, which that's a whole other conversation about how that show really tackles this issue with a lot of nuance and sensitivity, but this is literally a part of Captain Marvel. People keep claiming that She-Hulk is trailblazing, but it's really just recycling. And when we get monologues like this that have really great intent behind them and in isolation are powerful and great pieces and acted beautifully by Tatiana Maslany, but it feels weird to discredit someone and their trauma just because you are a white woman. And on top of that, I just don't believe that Bruce Banner would behave like this, be a creepy control freak, certainly not the Bruce Banner of 2023.
Damn.
I don't know, maybe that's the point. Again, it's an interesting and valid way to dissect his unresolved trauma, and perhaps it being unresolved is why it took him so long to sort out his life, a life that's still unsorted. But they make him kinda unlikable and smug, which is even more unfortunate given Banner and Hulk really haven't had much screen time in the MCU when compared to some of the other core members of the Avengers. And then when Bruce does come around to respect her decisions in the fallout of their fight, that resolution just happens entirely too fast. Both parties said some pretty harsh but kind of true things, and Bruce was a creep. I mean, like, I don't know, that's just kind of how they depicted him, and then it's just done? I guess it helps that they're more family, cousins, and bickering like that just happens, but on an elevated scale because they're gamma-fueled green giants, but that tiff needed much more time to mend, especially given how Bruce tells her she can call him anytime because he's the only one who knows what she's going through. Again, I've probably talked about this stuff for way longer than what's actually dedicated to it on screen. Yeah, this show is a half-hour, at least partly episodic sitcom, but that just shows you that they made this show under the wrong format. If this is the kind of story they want to tell, they probably should have told it properly. But alas, they press on. Maybe it picks up, right? To be fair, episode 2 is the second best episode of the season so far, and that's largely because it poses a lot of interesting ideas centered around Jen dealing with the fallout of being forcefully outed as the She-Hulk onto the world, something she didn't want, didn't ask for, but had to do in order to save the lives of the jury after a reckless, super-powered influencer, God, I can't believe I just said those words, called Titania, bursts through the wall of the courtroom, almost killing them. Jen did the right thing, the selfless thing, but it came at the cost of her anonymity, and now the media is having a field day with the spectacle of it all, with some doofus male reporter dubbing her a She-Hulk in a scene so bad it rivals the Han Solo name scene from Solo. Horrible scene aside, you do feel for Jen as she's thrust into the spotlight. There are interesting ideas regarding her losing agency and how and when she comes out to the world as a superhuman and not even having the chance to claim her namesake. Jen can't even exist without being derivative of the Hulk, and because the world sees her simply as the female version of her cousin, they make assumptions about her, treat her differently, as if she's a product of nepotism and not the year's worth of grinding at law school for a degree. Regardless of what her best friend Nikki says about indulging in the shallow instant celebrity She-Hulk affords her, saying fuck you to the haters, Jen isn't interested. There's no stability in being the latest Avenger, and it undermines the work she's put in as a woman working in law. She wants to use her law degree to provide herself with an actual stable foundation or healthcare, pay, maternity leave, whatever, giving us another instance where we interrogate what do the Avengers actually mean for someone when they aren't in battle? It's more of a public service popularity thing. It doesn't actually provide any sustainable support for the members, as we saw with Sam Wilson in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and now with how Jen recognizing the downside and snubbing her nose at the idea. But how does one grapple with instant celebrity, with the subsequent loss of agency and anonymity that accompanies it? Jen's life gets upended, and she arguably suffers because people are not only projecting onto her, they're now seeing her only on a superficial level as one side of herself, the She-Hulk side, while the person she was beforehand, the real Jen, has been cast aside. Her desire becomes to simply get back to a place where she can just be Jen and live as who she feels is her true self, one where her Hulk side is irrelevant. As the show progresses, I think Jen comes to learn that, true to Bruce's words, she can't just ignore the new part of herself entirely. Instead, she learns to leverage it and decide how and when the Hulk side of herself can and will be used. Not the media, not the men she works with or for. It's a journey to reclaiming her own agency and learning to live with both halves of herself. The Falcon and the Winter Soldier explored a similar idea, and Sam Wilson grappling with, but ultimately embracing the Captain America mantle. And for all the problems I have with that show, there are a lot of them, it explored that idea far better, merely by actually dedicating screen time to it. With She-Hulk, it's just teasing. Ooh, what are these interesting possibilities? Wouldn't that be fascinating? But anyway, Jen loses her job because of her She-Hulk reveal instigating a jury bias and therefore mistrial, and about 15 seconds later, she gets hired by the law office she was arguing that same case against. I'm not saying that the show should have dedicated an entire episode to, oh no, she can't get a job as a lawyer, what will she ever do? Guess she's gotta be the She-Hulk for now. Although that would have been more interesting considering that the real reason she gets hired is not her legal acumen, but instead the superficial fact that she has superpowers. You could look at the aftermath of her She-Hulk reveal as an equivalent to Jen having a public outburst, an outward display of emotions, speaking out against an injustice. It was justified. It was the right thing to do, but in the eyes of the patriarchy, allows her to be seen as a liability even the women-run firms don't want to take a chance on because it could disrupt their level of comfort. She's seen as a hero in the media, someone brave, but isn't treated as such in her day-to-day life, and that's the real problem. So much of this actually feels like an allegory for people in entertainment. Someone on the up and up speaks out against an injustice or workplace sexual harassment, gets the attention of the media, gets fired, is seen for a time as the champion of a movement. The storm blows over, and even after all eyes are no longer on them, they still can't get work. But because Jen then gets insta-hired by someone she vehemently opposed in court, yet has absolutely no objections or challenges to when given the job offer, there's not enough time to properly explore this. It's just another case of the show smashing through each plot point and interesting idea, interesting piece of commentary without really any concern for Jen as a character. Like, the idea that she did the right moral thing and then has to take a job at a firm that she morally disagrees with, or at least they were representing someone that she disagrees with on principle, is an interesting idea. It kind of speaks to Jen's desperation in the moment, but it really isn't given time to marinate. We aren't able to explore Jen's struggle with that decision because she just, boom, instantly takes the job. Even the fact that the new firm wants the She-Hulk, not Jen, the She-Hulk. The fact that it devalues Jen as a lawyer and forces her deeper into the hole she wants out of where she doesn't want to be the She-Hulk. The ways in which she struggles with that are only presented, and then we move on with the really bad law procedural because that's what the show is. Jen is qualified, but now everyone she works with is going to think that she got the job just because she's a Hulk. Oh wait, no, that's just an idea that's posed. We don't actually explore it in these episodes. There could have been a thoughtful dive into the commentary the show is making about the kinds of preconceptions and patriarchal bullshit that women in professional fields have to deal with, and the show instead finds it acceptable to merely bring up the idea, celebrate the fact that we brought up that idea of those struggles, but it's not actually going to address them. It's girl bossing Jennifer Walters, and it's honestly, for my money anyway, almost condescending in doing so. Sure, it's great that media is finally acknowledging shit that's been going on for decades, for stuff that is, kind of common knowledge at this point, that these issues exist. What a concept. But there are plenty of other shows and films that are unafraid to go the extra step and actually instigate and engage in a conversation about them. She-Hulk Attorney at Law just wants to pay them quick lip service. I guess it succeeds at that, but on the other hand, is lip service a success? I don't think so. But hey, who cares how I feel? I mean, look, many of you probably will think it's great, that you'll probably resonate with it, and that's awesome. Again, I'm just the asshole here with an opinion. But it doesn't matter because Abomination's back. He's up for parole, and there's a severe conflict of interest considering he tried to kill Bruce. Blonsky wants to retain Jen as his lawyer, and if she doesn't take the case, she doesn't have a job at the firm. Okay, so Jen is being pushed and pulled, told what to do, how to act, even what form to be in. She's supposed to be the face of this superhuman law firm, but when she goes to meet with the client, the male guard tells her she can't go in as the She-Hulk after she was just told she's not allowed to be anything more than the She-Hulk when representing the firm that she works for when she's in the office. But anyways, she must go into the maximum security prison as a human. She doesn't even get to just pick one side of herself to be at any given moment. She's constantly changing herself for men. It feels ridiculous to say, but this tiny little moment with a nameless prison guard is probably the most nuanced commentary the show has made so far about any of Jen's struggles as a woman and as a superhero in the workplace. Jen's biggest mistake was instantly agreeing to something out of desperation, and she's now facing the ramifications of not asking the right questions before agreeing to it. She's being used in a man's world either for legitimacy, leverage, as a token, a poster child. It's all incredibly demeaning. but what choice does she have? No one else will hire her. Almost every male figure she comes in contact with tries to mansplain how things work, how tough and dangerous things are, whether it's Bruce explaining how hard it is to be a Hulk and control the beast within, or Blonsky's security guard being condescending, telling her how dangerous being in the same room with him is. She tries to make a joke, to lighten the mood like she did with Bruce. Seriously, Tatiana Maslany is amazing in this role, and I wish it didn't feel like the larger show has so little respect for her, and is shot down. But you know what? It's fine. I guess maybe if you can get past the fact that Blonsky's return is almost definitely just there to set up the Thunderbolts, if you can get past the fact that Bruce and Blonsky have mended things via a fucking haiku, why? Jesus Christ. Yet, we didn't get to see any of it actually happen. Actually, can we talk for a second about how Blonsky is a completely different character from the last time we saw him? I get he's reformed, but similar to Bruce, we don't see that transition, so it's a bit jarring. It's also weird how they just sweep all of his wrongdoings under the rug because he apologized and wrote, he wrote haikus to Bruce and all of the other people he wronged. What I do like is how the parole board prejudged him before actually getting to know the new him, and his story of reformation ties into Jen's own struggle with her newfound celebrity, and the media appears crafting an image that simply isn't true. The only issue with this is Blonsky actually fucking murdered people and destroyed Harlem, as opposed to Jen, who just got superpowers and stopped someone from killing innocent civilians. There's history with Blonsky. You don't trust him. Him saying, "The government made me do it," is a pretty lame excuse for abusing a super soldier serum to out-alpha the Hulk. Jen sees right through this, calling Blonsky's nonsense justification out. I thought I was the good guy. It's the exact kind of language that those in power, those in Hollywood even, who've enabled or done bad things would use to justify their actions. It's not subtle, but more importantly, up to this point in the show, Jen hasn't done anything bad to anyone. So using Blonsky as some kind of parallel to her ultimately just doesn't work. For a while, you think Blonsky's gonna pull a fast one, that he's going to reveal himself to be the baddie we all suspected he'd be, but that doesn't happen, so we're just supposed to take him at face value. He gets parole, and then the case is over just as quickly as it began. I get sitcoms often have multi-episode arcs that then move on to the next story or situation, but hardly any legal drama goes down here. It's like someone in the writer's room looked up parole board hearing on Wikipedia and based their script on that. The Blonsky stuff is this show in a microcosm. It has interesting ideas, but it can't be bothered to give anything other than a bird's eye observation of the whole thing and then move on to the next half-assed case. Anyway, if you can get past all of that, then the fact that we finally get to breathe with Jen, to see her work her legal mind, to see her win for once, makes for the best part of the second and third episodes. Oh fuck, I just said the words third episode, didn't I? Damn it! The worst, and I mean the worst episode of any show in the MCU is the third episode of She-Hulk. There's this moronic B story involving one of Jen's co-workers at the new firm, representing one of the biggest dickheads she used to work with at her old firm because an Asgardian elf impersonated Megan Thee Stallion and made him think he was dating the real Megan Thee Stallion. This weird shapeshifter then impersonates him and infiltrates Jen's office. It derails the narrative, and no, finding a way to shoehorn Jen into the story and then having her literally say connecting the A and B story does not mean it coheres with the rest of the show. Turning one of Thor's most important speeches in a movie I greatly dislike about how Asgard isn't a place, it's a people, into a punchline is neither funny nor necessary. Impersonating a judge, an endless run of cringe humor, no real interest in the legal proceedings. Why the is Megan Thee Stallion actually in this? There's a post-credit scene that involves twerking in this episode that is just the cherry on top of why you should skip every single frame of episode 3 that doesn't involve Blonsky. Cameo bullshit has gotten completely out of control to the point where now it's celebrity cameos. There was a soundbite that came out recently about the writers of She-Hulk not being good at writing courtroom scenes, and so they really just didn't do it. I get it was meant to be self-deprecating, but they kind of told on themselves, no? They aren't good at writing courtroom material. Why was Law and Order with a superhero such a goddamn hard concept for them? It wants the legal comedy trappings without what the legal comedy has to offer you as a subgenre. A legal comedy without the legal stuff, so just a comedy? a bad comedy too at that. Whenever the show actually gets Jen in a courtroom, it can't wait to get her back out of it.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
I guess that's the writer's way of disguising their shortcomings in that respect, but it just makes how awful the courtroom scenes are stand out even more. If you're that bad at courtroom scenes, hire someone to help you with them. Do something to right the ship so that we don't end up with another one of whatever the fuck that courtroom scene in episode 3 is. Even episode 4 has Jen helping Wong by sending a cease and desist letter to a former student of the mystical arts to prevent him from using magic for profit or something? That's the pinnacle of legal procedure that these writers care about, a cease and desist. Making that the entire premise of the episode just makes the writing team look ignorant to a fault. People who can't imagine a worse crime than unlawful use of proprietary information. Are you fucking kidding me? I mean, imagine being sued by your university because you dropped out and used your skills to start a business. Oh my god. Oh, but he's violating natural law by using magic? Isn't any kind of magic breaking natural law? Is She-Hulk herself not a violation of natural law? That would actually be a pretty sweet premise. That's an interesting idea. Some bigot comes to She-Hulk to try and persecute a super for perverting natural law, forcing She-Hulk to grapple with the way ordinary people see her and whether she can uphold the laws of a society that sees her as lesser by prosecuting people just like her. They almost accidentally had a fun and genius and thought-provoking idea. What a concept. But they're clearly not interested in anything compelling when Titania sues She-Hulk for... God damn it. Oh, this is so bad. I can't believe I'm saying any of this. This is really stupid. Copyright infringement because Titania trademarked the name She-Hulk that some idiot gave Jen in episode 2. It's literally another copyright case. I can't believe this. She's not a copyright lawyer. What are we doing here? These fucking suits can't think of another crime. I guess the only attorneys they know are divorce lawyers and corporate copyright lawyers, and they figured She-Hulk had to be one of the two. They also need to figure out what the they're doing with the fourth wall breaks because they're too inconsistent and because of that, jarring. Just because that's a part of the character in the comics and a great part of the character in the comics, it's done so well in the comics, does not stop the show from feeling like a 10th-rate Fleabag whenever Jen looks at the camera. Being a bit meta and tongue-in-cheek about the use of cameos would be funny if it weren't for the fact that the show knows it's being completely egregious with them. It's not the first nor the 100th show to do such a thing, especially when we have shows like The Boys or Invincible that do it completely well without restraints. Fix your show's problems. Don't let them fester and then crack an on-screen joke about it. The fact that Moore Wong gives the show Twitter armor for a week is an actual line spoken on screen in episode 4 by the main character is mind-blowing. It's lazy. And with this overemphasis on cameos in the MCU and cringe humor, the show loses itself. It tries to comment on women in superhero media as much as it does about women in the workplace, and while I respect the show for endeavoring to have those conversations, I think the only moments She-Hulk excels at are when it's able to blend both together and show how Jen is dealing with all of this pressure, being under the spotlight and criticized for something that happened that was way beyond her control. But therein lies the issue. These are glancing moments in each episode rather than the show's focus. They had the perfect thing to center a show around here, and they chose to signal instead of engage with it. Jen didn't ask to be called the She-Hulk. She didn't ask for these powers. She didn't ask to represent the Abomination. All these things just happened to her. And while I love the meta commentary on female superheroes, the media and internet reception to them, I don't have a problem with female superheroes, but make your own. What makes her qualified to represent the Abomination? These are tweets and comments that show up in the episodes I watch, and how people are demanding that the She-Hulk fit a certain preconception of her, fit certain agendas and outlooks, not be in the position she's in, questioning her qualifications. That feels like something that is true to the real-life culture we currently live in. In even more meta sense, the show comments on its own backlash that happened when the first trailer dropped and everyone was mad that the show just existed. Plus, Jen is a firm believer in the core of the American justice system. That's not to say it's not corrupt, and she recognizes that, but she can do her part by impartially representing and giving convicts a second chance. The second she decides to represent Blonsky, despite the fact that he nearly killed her cousin, she put her judgment, her preconceived notions, her bias aside, and allowed herself to look at things as they are, allow them to surprise her, which is a great parallel to how we view women in the workplace, or more importantly, women in superhero media. We can label them, write them off as derivative, project our own emotions, insecurities, and biases onto them, but ultimately, let the work speak for itself. Let's give the hero the same chance we would give her male cohorts. In universe, let's give Abomination the same second chance Bruce got as the Hulk. You really feel the insane and unfair pressure that's put on Jen for just wanting to be a damn good lawyer and uphold the values she believes in as a purveyor of law and order. Look, Jen is struggling just to be a person, and the second She-Hulk was unveiled to the world, she stopped becoming a person and started becoming leverage, propaganda, a hot topic, something to perpetuate the media cycle. I like all those elements of the show. They're just undercooked, and more importantly, underutilized. Too much of the show's focus has been on cameos, memes, and cringe lowest common denominator of humor. Stupid celebrity cameos to complement their barrage of in-universe cameos, all three of which are things I'm tired of in the MCU, that it undermines the things I do like about the show. So, to put a cap on all of this, and good God, I've spent way too much time talking about She-Hulk. Can She-Hulk Attorney at Law recover from the absolute tailspin it's in? I don't know. Maybe. I guess my thing right now is, if I'm going to keep tuning in, which is a very big if right now, I want to see more of Jen struggling with this. I want a genuine conversation about these topics. If the show's going to tackle misogyny and toxic masculinity and being a woman in the workplace, then do so in a realistic way. Don't just throw an endless deluge of bumper stickers at us. Get away from the goddamn cringe humor too. Even things like, oh, Steve Rogers lost his virginity to a random girl on the USO tour before Peggy. Throwaway gag, the aforementioned turning Thor into a punchline moment. These are things that seem humorous in the moment, and like in isolation, yeah, they're mildly funny, but are really just undercutting some of the MCU's best and most iconic moments. Even someone as beloved as Wong. My God, poor Benedict Wong feels as though he's been dumbed down for the sake of the show. It mischaracterizes legacy MCU heroes, turning them into a punchline. I'm all for subverting expectations, being self-aware, being meta, but be clever and don't do it at the expense of sincerity or characterizations. And worst of all, they're robbing She-Hulk of standing on its own as a series. They've made a She-Hulk show that is almost bursting at the seams half the time to sideline her for no good reason, and that needs to change quickly. Oh, the show's called She-Hulk? Well, if it continues on this trajectory, I'm just gonna have to start calling it Shit-Hulk.